Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Anarchist podcast where I like to talk about things that interest me, things that I feel that are important and need to be discussed in the world. And as you can know by my name, some of the things we will talk about and some of the topics will range from political talk, statism versus anarchism, the existence of a government. We'll talk about, obviously, politics, economics, news, world issues, and stuff like that. But we're not just going to talk about that stuff. We're going to talk about all kinds of things: space, technology, the future, the cosmos. Whatever I feel that comes to mind, basically. Police brutality, race, racism, all the issues that are being talked about in social media. But I feel that I can give my spin on it and my perspective. And who knows what the hell if I get some listeners out of this. And if you guys enjoy my thoughts on these topics, we'll continue doing this. This is the first podcast I will be doing. And hopefully it'll be the first of a string of podcasts. And we'll just fly by the cuff here and no teleprompter, no script to go by. I'll just be talking off the top of my head about what I feel is important. So here we go. Let's kick it off and welcome, like I said, welcome again, ladies and gentlemen, to the Anarchist podcast. So first thing I guess I will delve into the podcast, I want to talk about police brutality because it seems to be sweeping the nation right now, and it's a big issue. So I've gotten into activism. Do a little back history now. Probably it started out when I was about 16 years old. Started getting into space and sciences and stuff like that, and talk radio, because I getting into space and stuff led me to get into aliens. And it's funny how we come to the ideas that we come to and how we mature and grow old. And it's funny how something as simple as an interest in space and sciences led me to listening to talk radio and shows discussing aliens and the cosmos, which led me to conspiracy theories, which led me to politics and economics and all the other joys and wonderful things that I've learned about, even psychology and sociology in a ways, the effects of peaceful parenting. We'll get into all these other things, but like I said, so about 16 years old to right now where I'm about 24 years old. Big time span where I've been studying a lot of these topics that I'm going to get into these podcasts. And it all stemmed from just looking around as a young youth growing up in this new technical age and seeing things like wars and corruption and having my own incidences with the police and stuff like that, where I just looked at society and realized that it could be structured and run differently. That as I get older and get into politics, I realized that not a lot of people agree with politics. They run into a lot of issues. It's very divided. You got Democrats and liberals and conservatives and Republicans wherever you're living, Canada, U.S., vice versa. And always this divide, and politicians never doing what they're saying. And as you get older, you realize how much politics affects your life by something as simple as stickers and insurance you got to have on your car, driver's licenses, and all these other things that it affects you, wearing your seatbelt and everything, all these rules on the books. So just by asking the big questions, I guess it led me down this pathway. So I've been studying and looking at this since 16, and I've been studying hard to figure out the answers to the questions I have. Just like many of you probably have questions as well, such as the one we're going to get into, the first one, which is, what do we do with this police brutality issue? Now, in order to address the issue of police brutality, you first must address the system that it's designed on. So right now, policing in general is run by a government. It is a government service. Now, when I say that police is a government service, it just simply means that there's only one corporation, one business, and one phone number that you can call when you have an emergency, which is 911. It's a government-run issue. Now, to kind of elaborate more with what that means for anyone who's not as much politically up to date as I am in these terms and what I'm speaking with, it just simply means that if you want to go buy a pizza, you can go to many different pizza shops. Well, the same scenario I'm using now, if you want to call the police, well, there's only one department that you can call the police, and that is obviously whatever your local police would be, and they would obviously be incorporated with the government. So, in addressing that issue and in analyzing the system, I realized that the police services have a monopoly on their services. And a monopoly obviously simply just means that there's only one business doing and offering services in that particular area in policing communities and stuff like that. So, when you have a monopoly, it makes it hard to keep that person accountable. Let me give an example this way. If you had only one pizza place where you lived and you wanted to order pizza there, and you ordered the pizza and it was crappy, you got crappy service, maybe the food wasn't good, maybe the customer or the employees treated you like crap, and now you simply don't want to go back there, but you're met with an issue. It's the only pizza place in town, and you have to make the decision, well, I guess I cannot eat pizza, or I have to suck it up and eat this crappy pizza because it's the only pizza in town. So having that monopoly there and having the only business makes that business less likely to want to be a good thriving business. Now, it can happen, but it makes them lazy because the business owner looks like, well, they have to come to me for the service because nobody else is offering the service. So it makes them the ability to slack. And it's just a common sense thing. If you're the only guy who is, let's use something a little more, something that you physically need, because pizza's not a good example. You can go without pizza, but you can't go with police. Police services you obviously need. They're very vital when you have situations where you got a robbery in effect or a domestic violence situation. You need someone to call to help you in those situations. So it's very important. So let's say one of the ways that we could address the police brutality issue is by simply demonopolizing their services. So this would mean allowing competition into the market. Now, anything that government does, it monopolizes. Whether it's healthcare, when it does healthcare, here in Canada, government has run healthcare system. And if you're a doctor and you want to go and off on your own and set up your own practice and charge cash, you can't do that. It's against the law. You have to go through the government. And this is where we run into issues into a lot of areas in our system, and especially the police brutality ones. Because let's say you had police department, let's call it police department A in your community, and this police department is brutalizing your citizens. Let's say this is the NYPD, for instance, brutalizing people in New York. The New York people, or whoever you are, wherever you live, you don't have another option. So if you had more options and the NYPD was doing a shitty job and the people in that community were unsatisfied with the service that the NYPD was giving them, they could simply pay for another police department who could be competing for that service. And maybe this police department called NYPD 2, let's make up a number here, NYPD Company 2, says, well, tell you what, you give us the contract this year and we can guarantee that we will do better job, and we'll sign into contract that we will be more careful and we won't kill his people. And obviously they're going to want to do a better job than the current NYPD is doing because they're going to want to fight for that contract each year. So just having that extra competition in the market creates accountability. We see this in the private market all the time. You go into a store, any kind of place you eat at, you get crappy service, you don't go back to the store, you eat somewhere else. It's a way of holding that business accountable. If a business is putting out crappy service and products, well, they won't last very long because other companies will come along, creating better services and products, filling that market need, and therefore putting that bad place out of business. Now, this is why we run into the issue with the police companies around, or government policing, and why we see an excessive police shootings and excessive force and people's rights being violated every day by the police. So allowing competition in the market would definitely help majorly address the police brutality issues. Now, this is also has to address another issue, in which is how the police board and the police services is funded. And when you start looking at this is where you start to get into the ideas of anarchism and where I have come to it and why I'm an anarchist and I oppose something as such as a government existence. Now, when you tell people you don't want the government to exist, they immediately look at you like you're crazy, and how can the world exist without a government? What will we do without police? What will we do without the roads? And all the list of things that someone will tell you that the world could not function if you didn't have a government. Now, as I was saying, we are looking at how the police are funded, and the government itself and the police and everything is funded through taxation. Now, when you start to look at taxation and you take philosophy, and philosophy is beautiful. It's a studying of knowledge, and when I was studying philosophy, it taught me to really hold words accountable, because we say a lot of words like taxation, but what does taxation mean? And how many people actually look at that and think of it and are taught about it? Well, we're certainly not taught about it in school. We're taught how to file our taxes, but we're never taught exactly what taxes are. So I really tackled this task, I guess, and I started to look at taxes because I looked at the whole police issue and I said, well, geez, if we could just simply pay for more competition in the market, like I said, pay to other police companies for the contract, then maybe we would get police companies competing, therefore getting better products and service out of that competition. But you can't do this because taxation. So I had to look at the issue of taxation. And when I did, and I looked at it philosophically, taxation is a fancy word for theft. Because let me give you a definition of theft. And this is my definition, and I want you to listen to it and see if you agree with it. I'm just going to keep it pretty simple. I'm not going to Google or Webster's the actual definition of theft. But to me, theft, I think, is just the forceful removal of one's property without their consent. That's a pretty simple way to break it down. Me taking something from another person without their consent. So, if you take theft by that definition, and you look at the taxation as a whole, we can all agree that not all of our tax money is going everywhere we want it. This is a way I can get across to people, and we can all agree on something, because some will agree that they want military taxes to go to the military. Some may not want it. Some may want some to go to the police. Some may won't. So we can all agree, though, that some of us don't want some things to go. Like, I know I don't want taxes to go to fund wars, for example, to build bombs and nuclear arsenals and stuff like that. So, and I'm pretty sure most people can agree they don't want their tax money going to funding wars, and especially even the NSA or domestic spying or all these other things. So pretty much every single person you could ask, even a statist who likes government, if you ask them, do you agree with exactly how every penny your tax dollar is spent that's taken out of your paycheck? And clearly they would agree that no, not exactly do they agree 100%, because obviously if they did, they'd have to support things like wars and government corruption, politician corruption, and all that other stuff that goes along with politics. So if you understand this then, and you can agree that your taxpayer money is not being spent exactly how you want it to be, and there are some may say, such as myself and other people out there in the system, born in Canada or born wherever, that levies taxes on the population, that I don't want to pay for anything. I'd rather pay for my own health care. I'd rather pay for all these services by myself. That person that living in that community and is being taxed is being subjected to theft. Because, like I said, theft is just forceful removal of one's property without their consent. So, many people are being taxed, and taxed high amounts. And it's nothing more than theft, because most people can agree that a lot of that money that goes to certain places they wish it didn't. Democrats don't like funding wars. Liberals don't like funding the war. And the Republicans and the conservatives, well, they like to have a military budget. So there's There's always these people that don't want to fund this, and other people don't want to fund that. Some people want to fund welfare programs. Some people don't want to fund welfare programs. And I think we should give people all these options. Because if you don't give people the option to fund these programs individually, well, that is, by definition, theft. And I think we should just structure our society around moral values rather than these made-up concepts and stuff like government that we have today. Because when I was growing up as a young child, we were taught very basic and simple, very simple rules. Don't hit, don't steal, don't murder, whatever the list of basic things. I guess if you don't hit, you don't steal, don't aggress against other people. It's pretty basic. I mean, if you can break rules and how to structure life down to basic, simple commandments. I mean, if you're religious, I'm not a religious person at all, but even the 10 Commandments and stuff. I mean, we structure society on simple rules and concepts, and that's how society should be structured. Our society should be structured that it is even a 3, 4, 5-year-old, even a person in kindergarten, should know right from wrong. But when we grow up and we become adults, these simple concepts like don't hit, don't steal, and don't murder, well, they seem to go away because I can point you to examples of all those that exist and they are acceptable. If you look at war, and we look at drone strikes or collateral damage, which happens, you can just Google it. It happens. It's inevitable with war. That's murder. Collateral damage is another word for murder. So we are told as youth that murder is never acceptable. Murder is never acceptable to kill someone unless your life is physically in danger and you are physically going to be killed. But we do it every day with drone strikes and wars. So here's a simple rule that we violate now as an adult. Don't steal. Well, I already brought up this theft thing. Taxation is theft when you look at it philosophically. And don't hit. Well, it's funny that in society, it's the only person that is legal to hit is your child. If you go and hit your wife for not having her room clean, well, you're going to get arrested for domestic assault. If you hit your child for not having his room clean, well, that's acceptable, even though you are 10 times the size of him. And supposedly a child doesn't have the knowledge and the amount of responsibilities that an adult has. So if you're going to smack a kid who's young, who has a not fully developed mind, who's still learning the rules and how to be an adult in the world, if you can smack a kid for, let's say, not doing his homework, not cleaning his room, just yelling, or just simply getting whatever the reason you come up with, would you do that if the exact same thing your wife did? So if your wife with mouth and back too, if your wife was, or your husband, if you're a woman, if your husband didn't clean the room or something. So we understand as adults that it's never okay to hit another adult unless they are aggressing and wanting to hit you. In that case, it's self-defense. But we hit our toddlers all the time. So I've learned to realize that us as adults, we don't even follow the basic rules that we teach our toddlers. And it's why the world is so messed up. If we got back to these basic principles, don't hit, don't steal, don't murder, and all these other things, well, that would lead you to the concept of anarchism. And when people think of anarchism, they think it simply means chaos, people throwing bottles, no rules or nothing, just anarchy is what they say. Well, that's not the case. Anarchy just simply means no rulers. That means everyone is put on an equal playing field. That means it's not okay for me to hit, steal, or murder, just as it is for the same rules for my neighbor and the prime minister and the queen and whoever is on the planet. The same rules apply universally. And this is not the case, because a police officer can roll up on a child, or let's not even say a child, let's say a teenager who's smoking a joint, and can physically grab that kid, put him in a cage, and hold him until he's being released and punished for simply smoking a plant. Now, an average citizen cannot do that. So if you're just a normal person and you go and grab someone and throw them and lock them up in your house, and keep him because he was smoking a plant. Well, you get arrested for kidnapping. And, so we grant police and these other people extra rights. And I think that's where things start to go wrong. Where everyone on the planet should have all equal and even rights. Nobody should be afforded extra rights. Because what is a common saying we hear all the time? Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And we know human beings are fallible and make mistakes. We can all agree that, yes, not all cops are bad, but not all cops are good. So you can't have a system knowing that rogue cops can slip through, and that having that system set up knowing that not all cops are bad, but not all cops are good, and the few bad ones will get through. The result of them getting through could be murder, because the power that comes with that job. The same with a soldier and all these other things. So we have to structure our systems better and design it better so that the system's set up that no matter what, even if a bad person slips in, he won't have the power to do the crimes he does, and if he does, can be prosecuted for them. And the current structure of the policing system does not work, and that's why we see the issues we see in society. So just to recap it up and to move on to another topic, you want to fix and eliminate police brutality in the society, completely almost gone. The same way you never hear of a security guard shooting someone at the mall, a security guard, having an argument and wrestle with someone and end up killing. Think of bouncers. I personally used to work as a bouncer, so I have forehand knowledge of what it's like. And bouncers are security guards in nightclubs that deal with drunk individuals. And I know, when I was a bouncer, these drunk individuals sometimes get a little too drunk and rowdy, and you have to ask them to leave the premise, to evacuate the building. Bouncers aren't strapped with guns. And we're in hostile situations where we're dealing with people that are not in their right states of mind. They're drunk, and we're telling them they have to leave. And there's been scuffles that broke out. I've been in situations where I have knives pulled on me. But never once did I feel that I had to kill the person because I was staring down a blade. I knew that this was the risk that I took when I signed up for the job. And police like to always say, well, I feared for my life. I feared for my life. You took the job, man. You took a job that's going to put you in situations where we're paying you to put your life on the line to protect the innocents. To holster that gun until... Yeah, you may holster it too long and result in yourself being shot, but that's what we're paying you for. Because if you make a wrong mistake and shoot an innocent person, well, that's an issue, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing these police officers shooting innocent people, and in many cases, maybe because he was holding something that looked like a gun, or shifted his pants the wrong way, because the police officer thought that his life was valued more than the person he was looking at, and the person might have had a gun. Well, that's not how the police mindset is not supposed to be like that. The same way when I was a bouncer, I had to use the tools given to me, my bare hands and whatnot, to deal with the situation, and I had to accept the risk given to me. Not to mention that police are not even on the top 10 list of most dangerous jobs. So when I hear them bickering on about how dangerous the job is, yes, it's dangerous, but in most situations it's not even the most dangerous. So they can't use that as an excuse. Besides, even if it was the most dangerous job, that's what we're paying you guys the dollars for. So if you want to eliminate police brutality, I'm telling you right now, if you take my advice, implement these procedures, police brutality will be completely gone. No more children, brothers and sisters will be murdered in the street and taken from us. No more riots and stuff like that. The black communities will be taken better care of and stuff like that because of this. So what you want to do is, first, you must fund police services voluntary. It cannot be levied. It can be levied in a tax, but the tax must have the right of the individual to pull out. So we can do things like this now. We have GoFundMe programs. We have ways to set up websites to fund things. So I would just simply have a GoFundMe, or have a website, or have a way that you can pay, just like you pay your insurance every month, your health insurance, your car insurance. Well, you pay protection insurance. And this protection insurance is what you can pay in your house, or if you're in a community, you can all get together in your community and decide to chip in and stuff like that and pay for these protection services. So doing it voluntarily. And doing it voluntarily, because that is so vital. Because if the police start doing a shitty job and start killing your brothers and sisters in the streets and start violating your rights, well, then you can say, well, you know what? I'm not paying for this service. It's not what I signed up for. So you're supposed to serve and protect, not enslave. And tax and levy fines and stuff, and do bullshit things for politicians. And look at the seatbelts. They write you a couple $100 fine for not wearing a seatbelt. What business is it to the government or the police whether or not you have your seatbelt on? Should you have your seatbelt on? Absolutely yes. But if you don't have your seatbelt on and you die in a car accident result in it, whose fault is it? It's your own fault. We don't need a law there, and writing you a $200 ticket and paying the government $200 now all of a sudden doesn't make it any better or make you any more responsible. Or it's just a way to make money. It's a money Ponzi scheme. We all know that. So if you're able to pay for police services voluntarily, like in some kind of insurance, just like you pay car insurance, health insurance, you might get sick one day, you pay for health insurance. You might have a domestic assault, you might have a robbery, you might have whatever incidents, you might need the police. Well, pay for it like an insurance type scenario. And that way, when the police stop doing a good job, you can simply stop paying your money to them, just like other people would, because obviously they'd be treating them bad as well. Then they would go out of business. Now that's step one. You must pay for the police voluntarily. You must be able to stop funding them when they don't do their job. Part two is allowing competition. You can't have only one police service in your community. You must allow competition. So anybody who wants to start up a police business or a protection service business, go ahead, do it. Make it happen. The more of them competing with each other, the better it is. That way if excuse me. That way if one does bad, stop funding that one, start funding the other company, and there you go. Problem solved. That's why you don't see police officers and bouncers, or security guards and bouncers excuse me, having the same issues that police do, simply because, well, there's multiple security companies and there's multiple bouncer companies that you can license into your nightclub. So that right there is a recap, or basically how you can eliminate police brutality. That's it, broken down. That's the answer. It's what I've came to. I've studied it. I've addressed it. I've looked at the issue multiple times. And that's the best answer I've come up with. And it is an effective answer, because when I look in the market, and like I said, I look at other positions, other protection services like security guards, like bouncers and all these other things that have a similar kind of job position or job requirements, I don't see the problems. And so we can see by looking at them that this is an effective way to have competition and to fund them voluntarily. Do that, police brutality will be almost non-existent. So let's move on to another topic now, because that was a good one. So we'll move on to something else. Let's see. What is a hot press issue in the news right now that I could give my perspective on? Well, I guess we'll talk about guns and gun control, because with this recent another mass shooting, there seems to be a mass shooting now every week. The gun control debate gets brought up every single time we see one of these mass shootings happen. So let's talk about guns and the gun issue. And the gun issue, to me, it's common sense. To me, it's easy, but I know it's not always that way for other people. And that's the hard thing as us activists, or us people who've studied this information. Knowing it and talking, it's hard to think of people that don't know this. But at a point in time, I didn't know the things I'm talking to you about. It takes time, and it takes time to study and look at these issues and to find solutions to them. And a lot of people are busy, are working, have their own family issues going on, and have got so much in their life, which is how the government's designed it, I feel, so much going on that they don't have the time to really look at the philosophy and do the research and figure out these solutions to these problems. So look at me and my podcast kind of as a shortcut. Don't think it's an ego thing. I hate when people think that I'm coming across as though I know more about politics or economics than any other person. I only know more about certain topics because I choose to invest time to study them. Just like I wouldn't go to a doctor and argue with him about how to do open heart surgery. He's obviously the expert. I'm not looking at him as an egotistical man. He just has taken the time to study the medical practice, and that's why he's an expert in his field. So just divulge what I say, and if it makes sense, it makes sense. So when I look at the gun control issue, I look at it like this. Are we going to stop violence in society? No. I wish we could, but we're not there yet. We may in the future, but we're not there yet. Violence still exists. Now, if violence still exists, then there will be people out there that will want to do violent acts. Now, when a person does a violent act, yes, sometimes you can use a gun as a tool. But unless every single gun on the planet is taken away, then the person that has the gun and the person who doesn't have the gun, there's a massive power ratio there. Obviously, the gun person is, you ever heard the saying, don't bring a knife to a gunfight? There's nothing that can compete with a gun when it comes to weapons. So the only way to deal with a person with a gun is as another person with a gun. That's why when you have a shooter scenario, who do they call? The police with guns. They don't call police with other kind of weapons. A gun's the only effective way to deal with another person with a gun. So when you understand that violence is going to exist, we're not there yet, where we have total peace in the world, then you have to ask yourself, well, is it possible for there to be zero guns in the world? No, it's not. There's just too many. And I always say to the politicians, I'll tell you what, I'll turn my guns in when the politicians and everyone else turns in their guns, and the military and everyone. Because if the solution to end gun violence is just take people's guns away, well, then we got to take the politicians and everyone else's away, because police kill thousands of people. What about them? So we got to take away their guns, right? Politicians. Here's another thing that's crazy about the gun issue. These politicians will want to take your guns away, while these guys are in control of bombs and nuclear arsenals. And literally Obama will get out on there and speak about taking gun regulations and talking about gun control methods and stuff, and it's a tragedy, but it'll literally drone strike someone. So you want to talk about people not owning guns? I don't want people to own bombs. I think bombs are a lot more deadly and dangerous to own than a gun. Yeah, a gun is a bullet. A bomb can obliterate, in some cases, homes and blocks and stuff. So we trust people with bombs, but you're not willing to trust the people with guns. I mean, that's just crazy. So when you look at the scenario that you're not going to get rid of all guns, and you're not going to get rid of all violence. So when I look at the situation like that, then I look at it like this. You got this shooter, crazy guy, who's coming into the schools like you see. Forget how preventing him. Because everyone's like, well, if no one can get guns, then he won't be able to get a gun to go do the school shooting. That's not going to happen. There's a black market. There's ways to get around that. So we already just agreed previously that it's impossible to get rid of every gun in the world. So forget about everyone talking about, well, we need to prevent the guy from even getting the gun to be there. Well, the only way you could do that is to be able to study this guy's mental health issues somehow and predetermine that he's going to be a murderer. Now, that may be doable, but there should have been signs. The parents or something that set some of this off. And in some scenarios, there were signs, and people didn't speak out, and these shootings happened. But let's get back to the scenario. You got a guy there. Okay, we can't prevent it. It's gonna happen. And if you get rid of guns, he'll just wire explosives to himself, or he'll just go on a knife spree, which we see happen. So, but forget about it. You have a scenario where, like you've seen with this recent school shooter, he enters the building. He has a gun. Nobody else in the school had a gun. He's basically, everyone else there is victim to this guy. And I don't know why anyone doesn't see that. And when I ask any human being that if you were in a room, I'll ask you another scenario here. If you had a room and you had 20 people in it, would you rather all 20 people to have a gun or one person have a gun? And even you gun control persons, forget about zero guns. Forget about it, because we already said it cannot be done. Okay? It cannot be done. It's impossible to get rid of all the guns in the world. There's too many of them already sold. There's too many flooded the market. It's impossible. So would you rather be in a room with 20 people, every one of them armed, or one of them armed? And when you ask each individual that question, even these people calling for gun control measures, well, they'd say, well, I'd rather be in the gun with everyone in the room. Well, of course you would. That everyone has a gun. Because if you're in a room where only one guy has a gun, he can literally control the other 19 people in the room. Unless they all decide to tackle him. But even still, that's risky. But if you're in a room where everyone has a gun, well, if one person acts up, he's got 19 other people that can put him down in a second. Now, am I saying to arm everyone in the school? Absolutely not. But why is it that banks have security guards protecting money? Jewelry stores have security guards. The Pope has a security guards all going around his damn stupid ass vehicle. President Obama, every time he goes out anywhere, has security guards. So we see having guards around to protect things such as jewelry, banks, people, politicians, it's effective. So when the guy goes on the school, there's only one way to stop him. Now you can call the police, but we all know the police can't teleport to you. Not yet anyway. Maybe eventually we'll get the technology that they can teleport right on scene. We're not there yet though. That's for another podcast. So the only way in that initial seconds that this crazy person enters a school, the only way to stop that guy is if someone immediately on the premise could stop him. If not, then it's a lost cause. And what happens is what we see happen. I guarantee if you put a security guard in there, or armed a teacher, or allowed anyone with concealed carry as an adult on these college campuses, anyone who's of age to own a gun, allow them to carry them, then in those situations, you will stand a hell of a lot better chance. You won't be outgunned. You will have an equalizer. The gun control debate is no debate. It's stupid. You take people's guns away, it's victim disarmament. Not to mention the whole tyrannical government aspect of gun ownership. Then gun ownership is not only to protect your family, to protect yourself, because it can be a dangerous world, but also to keep it in your closet in case one day your government gets too out of hand. And for those people who say it's 2015, it can never happen. We live in 2015, that's right, but we have North Korea that still exists. We have government corruption that exists. We are, in my sense, modern slaves. Which will lead me to my next point. We're going to talk about slavery. And are we slaves? Which I agree that we are. But let's wrap up now with this second topic here, which was the gun control issue. And for me, it's a simple one. The only way to stop a guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And the gun control nuts act like, well, we can't trust people with guns. Oh my God, you can't just have light gun restrictions and everyone will have guns and blah, blah, blah. We can trust people with guns. You trust the police with them. You trust your goddamn government officials and other human beings that are just like you and fallible just like you and who have problems just like you with nuclear launch codes, with bombs, with drones. So don't say you can't trust people with guns when we trust people with that kind of explosive power every day. It's absurd. So the gun control issue, very simple. The only way to stop crazy people with guns is good guys with guns. And if there's not a good guy with a gun around, then the crazy guy will win. That's how it works. That's how nature works. You want to end school shootings? It's very simple. Put security, put armed teachers, or whatever the situation may be. You don't want it to look like a prison either. I'm not calling for that. I don't want our schools to look like a goddamn prison with armed guards everywhere either. It's not a healthy environment to send our kids to. But it wouldn't be not bad to have some plain clothes marshal or security guard or whatever situation, a teacher, something like that. And you would eliminate the school shootings, because if you've also studied the school shooting situations, you've realized that every single mass shooting that has ever taken place has taken place in a gun-free zone. In a zone where he knew that the only resistance he would meet would be the response time of the police. And I can't understand how liberals and Democrats and people on the left don't understand this. To me, it is the most common sense thing. So I can't even imagine how someone can't realize that. Excuse me. I can't imagine how, like I said in the scenario, if you had the option to be in a room with 20 people, all 20 armed or one armed, that you would ever choose the one armed scenario. And if you're calling for any kind of gun control restrictions, that's what you're asking for. To be in a room disarmed with other people having guns, and it's not a good situation. And that's why we see the things happen. So you want to eliminate school shootings? Very simple. Allow some security on the campus, on the school premises. Problem solved. Just like nobody's robbing banks as much and stuff like that, where you do see security guards and armed people on the premise. You don't see those places getting shot up. Simple as that. So there's that answer. So let's move on now to the third thing I want to talk about tonight, which was slavery, because I just mentioned it a minute ago. And it's a funny thing, slavery. Not a funny thing, but it's so funny that people walk around today believing that it don't exist, that actually believe that we live in a free society, that believe just because people are not picking cotton in the fields that slavery's been abolished. But if you're forced to pay the man, the government, the system, 50, 60, 70, whatever the percent may be of your wages, at what percent do you become a slave? Because there are different forms of slavery, I feel. Yeah, I could physically take your body and stick you in my backyard and make you do labor. Or I can let you free range but also steal half of your labor. I also feel that's a form of slavery. I feel slavery is just simply doing something to another person, forcing them to do your will. And there's a lot of people out there that pay ridiculous tax rates that I imagine if they had the option would not. And that's slavery. At what point do you become a slave? Like I said, I ask you again. 100% taxes on your labor, 100% of your stuff, you're a slave at that point. We all agree that's what the people were on the plantation. But back in those slavery days, the slave owner who owned the plantation had to feed his slaves, had to house them, because they wouldn't be very productive slaves if he just let them die and rot off. So he had to invest in them. So they took 100% of their labor, but they provided them with shelter, food, and the basics. So a government takes 60% of your labor, 50, in some cases higher, and gives you, some subsidies, housing, healthcare in some situations, depending on where you live. It's just a subtle form of slavery. No different. The only difference is it's just not as much. Slavery is slavery to me, whether it's little or much or a lot. And that is the true problem with our society, and why government is immoral in the first place, and why we run into issues that we have. Wars, police brutality, shitty healthcare, corruption, government, NSA spying. All of this stems from the fact that government, this organization of people, are the only organization on the planet that we allow them to forcefully take our money. Well, not allow them. I don't want to say allow them, because not that I allow them, I have no choice. If I don't, well, I get locked up. Tax evasion and whatnot. So, if you want to eliminate all the issues you see in society, wars, immigration, all these other things would simply be solved by structuring a society that's based off voluntarism. And that's all anarchism is, and what libertarians are trying to achieve, and why we want to get out of the left-right paradigm and get back into freedom, get back into what's right, what's wrong, get back to the basics. And the basics would be voluntarism. We see it every day. You choose who you want to be with your partner. We don't force marriages. We don't force you where to eat. And we shouldn't force you to pay for things like government. And people will say, well, who will pay for these things? People will pay for them because they want them. The same way people buy iPads, the same why people buy food and clothes and everything like that. People will buy things that they need. So when people say, well, if you got rid of government in its current form, we can still have a legal system. We can still have police officers. We can still have all of these things that governments provide us with, roads, and all of these things, but only I suggest we fund them individually in voluntary manners. And I guarantee if you do that, a lot of these issues will go away. If roads were privatized and not monopolized by the government, and we allowed competition and companies to compete each year for road contracts or whatever the case may be, it would drive down the price, and it would be better services, and it would just be better in general. It's why iPads and phones and stuff get better every 6 months, but the roads look like crap, and they're still using roads that we've basically used for thousands of years, the same kind of structure and design. When you get rid of competition, you stifle innovation. You stifle other companies from learning, from trial and error, what works and what they can improve on. And currently, we know our system's not working. So I see these right now. There's all this politicians running for political office, and it's all a joke. It really is. Because when you understand that it's all just stolen money, and everyone's just arguing on which way they want to spend it. Meanwhile, nobody's looking at the fact that, hey, maybe we shouldn't set up a system that's based off of stealing our money in the first place. And maybe the immoral act at the first makes everything afterwards trickle into bad. We must address the tax code. We must address the base the fundamentals of government. What makes it? And what makes government is taxation, and taxation is theft. And it's that simple. And, you know, for me, it's hard for me, because for me it's so simple for me, but I know some of you guys may be listening to this and it's not that simple. So just, like I said, think it over for a couple days, mull it over, run it in your head, and just say, hey, any of the stores that when I leave out of my house each day and go to that isn't forcing me to be there, I get pretty good service. And if I don't, I just choose to go somewhere else. Why can't we have that for our government? Why can't we have that for roads? for healthcare, for police services, for prisons, for courts. Now, to give you an idea of what a court may look like, let's say you have, um, a murder situation. Someone murders someone. Well, then you would have this protection agency or this court system that would be voluntarily funded, and they would deal with it just as if the courts deal with it now. It would kind of be like dispute resolution centers, mediation. Now, murder is a tough one, but it would definitely be dealt with. But let's deal with something a little more simple at first. We'll get into that one later, but let's say you have a situation where someone steals from you. Well, your protection agency would get a hold of their protection agency, or if they didn't have a protection agency, well, you would have to, get them and bring them before the courts, the way we do now, and try and determine their guilt in the courts. Now, how would you pick the judge? Well, the judge would have to be picked voluntarily, agreed upon by both parties. So you would look in the papers and you'd say, oh, well, we got to find a judge for this case. Judge so-and-so has a good record of being fair and honest. He's proven himself with other cases in his track record. So, hey, both parties can agree, both lawyers or whoever's representing the people can agree. This is the judge we can agree on. And that would also have a lot better, because right now the judge is a monopoly and he works for the state. And this way, he would work for the individuals, and both parties would agree for this person to mediate over their case. And I feel that something like that is how we would structure our legal system. But for me to try to understand it is very, very complex and hard to do. But just because it's complex and hard to understand doesn't mean it's impossible. Now, another way to think about this is back in slavery days, people would obviously back then, if you were to think, hey, if we end slavery, the common question back then would have been, well, who will pick the cotton? Nobody back then could have ever imagined in a million years that simply by eliminating slaves, that the humans would go on to innovate and create a machine that goes and eats up the cotton and does it all robotically. So that person back there, when you were asking for the abolishment of slavery, and they said, well, who will pick the cotton? It's just like a person that asks me nowadays, well, if we get rid of government, how will roads be built? How will courts be structured? The humans will innovate, and they will come up with solutions. Now, that's scary to some people. But look at the past and look what's it resulted and how effective it's been. We eliminated slavery. We got farm machines that can pick cotton robotically. And I think if we start structuring our society morally first, then everything else will fall into place. Just like we said, I don't care how the cotton gets picked. Slavery is not okay. Well, I don't really care how the legal system will get set up as long as you're not stealing to start funding that system. You can't have a system based off of an immoral act in the first place, of theft. And that's why voluntarily funding things is the only way to do things on the planet. And anything any different should be looked down upon. So we've talked about police brutality. I've given my answers by funding them voluntarily, and allowing competition in the market would eliminate the police brutality issues. We've addressed the gun control issue. I think it's absurd. You're not going to get rid of crazy people that want to do crazy things. The only way to stop those crazy people from doing crazy things is a good person with equal way to stop that crazy person, which is a gun. So gun control, it's not a topic or an issue. So I give you my thoughts on that, and then we just talked about slavery, taxes, and how I feel we could design and structure a government to make our society be run better. So what else can we talk about here? But I think I may wrap it up. We're going on 54 minutes now, so I think this was a good intro podcast to start. I don't want to talk about too many of my issues, give it all away yet. And there's a lot for you guys to swallow and try to indulge in. So those are 3 big topics, 3 major issues hitting the airwaves right now, sweeping the nation. So I think I'll wrap it up right now with that. I think I'm not going to talk about any more topics in this episode, but I will be doing an episode again very soon. Maybe even I'll put one right out after this, because this one was really fun and I got a lot more topics to talk about. Some things I still want to talk about and we'll get into. We'll talk about the basics, Hillary Clinton, and we'll talk about the politicians and stuff like that, although it can be boring. But we'll also talk about science. I'm really interested in space, the cosmos, black holes, dark matter, event horizons, all that kind of shit. I don't know. Obviously, I'm not an astrophysicist or anyone super smart, but I do like to listen to the Lawrence Krauss and Neil deGrasse Tyson and them guys, and I do like to just allow my little pea brain to talk about those issues. So we'll talk about that kind of stuff because it's cool to keep the podcast interesting. We'll talk about conspiracy theories and aliens and all that fun, interesting stuff. And I take conspiracy theories with a grain of salt, obviously. A lot of them are false, but there are some of them that have come out to be true. So we'll be talking about that as well. What else can we talk about on the podcast? Future issues. Let's see. We'll talk about cars I'm interested in. Let's see. We'll talk about religion. Obviously, yes, religion, a huge topic. And I'll just give you a little blip now before we'll get into another podcast some other time about religion. But just to give you full disclosure, I am an agnostic, an atheist. So that's my thoughts already to let you know. But we'll talk about religion because it's a very interesting topic. And I definitely do enjoy talking about it. I love listening to Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss and stuff like that debate. So we'll definitely talk about that, and I'll give my perspective. Just real quickly, I'm gonna list off a bunch of people that I enjoy listening to, and some of the issues that we'll be talking to. And these guys have influenced me a lot. So. Hang on, let me just pull it up here. Bear with me. So let me know in the comments section below if you guys have any topics you want me to talk about as well. I will keep an eye out for any comments. Just still looking for 1 minute. Oh yeah, another thing I would like to talk about one other time in a future podcast. We'll get into the Zimbardo-Stanford experiment. Very interesting. We'll talk more about it, about the concepts of authority and how authority is installed into us and how it can be very dangerous that people just blindly accept authority. And that's what the Stanford prison experiments showed, about how people just blindly accept, and the Milgram experience as well, the Milgram experiment, all that kind of interesting stuff, the psyche, how people just listen to authority. And that leads me to another topic we'll talk about some other time, which is childhood and upbringing and the effects of bringing up a child in an authoritarian manner and with violence and trauma and all that other kind of stuff, and how it affects people down the road. And I truly believe that all the world's problems can be simply solved with parenting. But, that's basically everything, I think, broken down. There's very few crazy people in the world that are genetically born crazy. Most of them are born crazy because of their upbringing. So that's another thing we'll talk about. We'll talk about drugs. We'll talk about drug legalization, decriminalization, my thoughts on them, and all that other kind of stuff. So let's just see. Okay, so I'm going to go down now and read off just a list of people that I enjoy listening to on a daily basis. And I'm just going to do this to give you guys a list of people that you may want to listen to and may want to help shape your mind as well. So if you're ever wondering where I get these ideas from, these are some of the guys I enjoy listening to and who have helped shape my mind. I've read a lot of their works and listened to them, so we'll go ahead and read them right now. So Lawrence Krauss, as I said, Sam Harris, another guy who talks about religion a lot. Richard Dawkins, I really enjoy. Neil deGrasse Tyson. Joe Rogan, the Joe Rogan podcast. Believe it or not, Joe Rogan, MMA radio talk guy, is actually extremely knowledgeable, has a Joe Rogan podcast, and he has wonderful guests on there all the time. Great podcast. I encourage you guys to check him out. Another person I enjoy that shaped my mind a lot, and brought me to these concepts is Stefan Molyneux. Shout out to him. Adam Kokesh, liberty activist. Jeff Berwick. Alex Jones, believe it or not, in the early days. Although he's got a lot of hit or miss information out there, but he can be good as well. Christopher Cantwell. Christopher Hitchens. Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle. Of course, you got to have the three philosophers throughout time. Nikola Tesla, we'll talk about him in future podcasts. Luke Rukowski with We Are Change is doing a lot of great work. Larkin Rose. Cody Wilson, who is doing the 3D printed guns. So we'll talk about that in another podcast too. That we're actually moving to a situation where there will be no gun control debate, because you'll soon be able to just 3D print a gun at your house. So that's pretty interesting, and that is Cody Wilson with that. So Gerald Salenti as well with Trends in the News. Dan Dix, who is a local Toronto activist. We got Peter Schiff, who's economics. Mark Stevens. Cop Block is very good. You guys should check them out for cop accountability. I also used to listen to Coast AM with a lot of conspiracy theories, the George Norrie and that. So, we'll talk about aliens and all that kind of stuff, like I said. The Mises Institute, another great group, educational group that talks about liberty and stuff like that. Ron Paul, of course. You got to know Ron Paul. Tom Woods. The Colbert Report. Murray Rothbard, MLK, and Malcolm X, of course, as well. I liked a lot of their work, but I'm preferably a Malcolm Xer rather than a Martin Luther. I found his methods were a little more passive-aggressive rather than Malcolm X's. So, but that is episode 1 of the Anarchist podcast, and I talked about those 3 topics. Stay tuned for part 2. We'll get into the next range of topics. Hope you guys enjoyed this first podcast, and we went over an hour here, but hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you did, smash the thumbs up button. That'll be awesome. If you guys want me to do more of these, it'll be very encouraging to put out the material if you guys are supporting it and watching it and thumbs upping it and sharing it and stuff like that. So if you guys could help me out, hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the Anarchist podcast. We'll see you guys in podcast number 2. Peace.